Hello, everyone. Welcome to Conceptualism. Very pleased to have with me today Amin-Mohammed Jamani, who is the founder and director of merchandising at Handsome. So, AJ, tell us about your start in fashion and in making things.
For sure. Well, I appreciate you having me. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Um, yeah, I'm happy to get into a bit of the history. So I got into fashion. I guess the seeds were kind of planted at a young age, just out of interest. My older sister Jamila was into fashion, so I got that big sister influence. I remember when I was maybe like 10-ish. She got me a couple of sweatshirts. One was from Club Monaco and one was from Guess. And I remember just like wearing them at that age and not really like thinking much of it other than like, my sister got these for me and then like getting people's feedback and people being like, "Oh man, like who's this kid wearing these things?" And those brands were hyped back then,
Uh huh.
so that kind of stuck with me where I was like, oh, like, what you wear can have this emotional connection to how you feel, how other people's perceive it. And I think that kind of sparked my initial interest. And I was always into fashion. Then when I went to university, my roommate Christian and I started screen printing shirts just
Mm.
as like a fun thing for ourselves to do. And
But then people decided that they were cool, and they asked
yeah,
you they asked to buy
yeah,
a
yeah,
T-shirt.
exactly. Yeah, so we started having friends that wanted them, and then just people around campus, and yeah, it started growing. It was like super DIY initially. Like we had a
Mm.
friend that worked at American Apparel, and he would give us his employee discount.
Mm.
We'd buy up a bunch of t-shirts and we would actually screen print them ourselves, and then we started like working with the local screen printer to get better quality, and it was growing from there. And then I kind of came to that crossroads of graduation, and I thought if I could do this instead of like a more traditional job, if I can just create products, things that excited me and have people connect with them, that would be ideal.
Amazing. So
Yeah.
so it was born out of out of something that was out of your curiosity and something that you thought was cool, and then you realized that there was some sort of interest, that people were
Hmm.
starting to show
Hmm.
interest in what you guys were making.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
And so what next?
In terms of the timeline, so school was in Kingston, which is a few hours outside Toronto, and
Mhm.
then I moved back to Toronto, which is where I grew up. And we continued the brand. We were doing mainly like graphic T-shirts and sweatshirts back then,
Mhm.
and yeah, it kept kind of evolving and maturing. We got to um, start doing wholesale. So we started working with some retailers in the city, which was really cool because some of the shops that picked us up in early seasons were, stores I used to be intimidated to go into. And then, as I like grew up, I'd start to like go in and chat with the staff and learn about the brands. And, it was like pre e-commerce really
Mm.
taking off. So it was really like important, like what stores were in your city and, what did they choose to carry? How could they speak to the brands and so on?
Yes.
So it's cool. We got to sit alongside some of our favorite brands, and it gave us a different level of exposure. Um, yeah, and then we kept kind of growing. We tried different things, different levels of quality, different price points. And then one of the big changes was when we introduced jewelry. That was a big product extension for us. And it was exciting at the time because it felt like, a lot of brands could do graphic t-shirts and sweatshirts, and jewelry was a bit more of a differentiator.
Mm,
So that also was like great for the brand perception, and it gave us a chance to do something different. And like this whole time it was all just working on instinct, trial and error. Christian and I at that time just doing what excited us, and seeing what the reaction was like every time we did a new capsule. We really were kind of learning based on the reactions.
mm.
Hmm.
Well, that's really interesting. It's almost like a series of experiments, and
Yeah.
you're sort of like documenting the result each time, and charting it out and realizing, okay, this is what works here, and this is what works here, and here's what doesn't work.
Yeah, yeah,
And
totally.
you
Totally.
probably carry those lessons even today from those
For sure. For
experiments.
sure. For sure. I think like one of my biggest takeaways is that if you try something and it works, sometimes it's always like something to be celebrated, and
Mm,
sometimes it's not clear what aspect of that made it click. So I think like when we were a younger brand, we would kind of be reinventing ourselves based on our own personal interests, or trying to achieve a different level of quality that might change where it's at price wise. And like one of the things I learned was that like hold on to what you're doing and just let it be additive. Just grow on what you have instead of kind of starting from scratch every time you have a new concept.
yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me, actually. That
Mhm.
that you would want to keep, you would want to keep and build what's already there. You know, it's like, why would you tear down a building that's already got that's perfectly functional? Why would you start from the foundation every time? That makes no
Mhm.
sense.
Mhm.
Like,
Yeah.
in terms of building the brand, it makes sense to continue adding to the legacy, to continue adding history.
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah. I think we viewed it at the time as improvements, but we were kind of learning through experience that like to understand what attributes work, and to try and, yeah, like I said, to keep those and then just add something new, or if we want to do something more premium, you don't have to like move everything up market. You can kind of test it in different areas and so on.
Yes.
Hmm.
Yeah, and offering materials at different, I mean, offering different price points. Like
Yeah.
with your jewelry, you have cuffs in brass, in silver, in gold, and I believe in platinum. So, and also titanium, I think.
Hmm.
So like, depending on what the person wants to spend, then they can choose, what metal that they want to get the cuff in.
Yeah. Yeah, totally.
So that makes sense. Although, um, the design of the cuff is the same. It's just the metal that's different. Like,
Yeah.
if it's in a theme, just to clarify for the listeners, like, let's say it's a New York themed cuff, then
Hmm.
they would all have the same design and the same inscription on them, I believe.
Yeah, for sure. I can go into the New York example a little bit.
Yes, please.
So,
Yeah, what inspired it?
um,
What inspired it? And I should also add that you guys are a conceptual brand. Like, you guys have uh you
mhm.
work with themes, you work with concepts and ideas, and those are just as important as the actual products that you're selling. It's the ideas associated with them.
For sure, for sure. From super early on, we would always start designing a collection based on a concept as opposed to based on a season, which is often how fashion collections are put together. So, for example, like the cuffs that you touched on in the New York design are part of the City collection, which is a collection of jewelry that was inspired by the emotional connections that people hold with different cities. So, like for me personally, like growing up in Toronto, obviously it's a special place. It's my hometown. And then I had this really strong draw to New York, and had the privilege of moving there. Had the chance to travel to different special places. Like one of my favorites was Tokyo. So what's cool is that we see people pick up pieces of the collection based on their personal experiences. So maybe it's their hometown, or maybe it's somewhere they aspire to go to. Maybe it's a special trip they took with someone. So the New York example you touched on, um, I used to go to New York when I was younger, just for like a few days here and there on trips from Toronto, and I just really fell in love with the city. And when I had the chance to move there, initially for school and then stayed on, I used to pass by the Flatiron Building every day on my way to campus,
Mm,
and that really became kind of an opportunity for me to pause and see this iconic piece of architecture, and just for me to take a moment and appreciate that I got to be in New York. So what we did for the New York design is we pulled up architectural drawings and blueprints of different references. So in this case, it was the Flatiron Building. And then we design the specs of the jewelry based on different dimensions of the building. So for
mm,
example, our New York cuff, if you look at one edge of it, there's the bird's eye view of the Flatiron Building, and we've shrunk it down but maintained the proportions. And
so
then,
what's the
like you
scale?
said, you can. I don't know the scale offhand.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah, but
yeah,
it's basically totally the same proportion, just scaled down.
exactly, exactly.
That's
Yeah,
super
yeah. We
cool.
really wanted to. Yeah, we really wanted it to reflect the original design,
Mm,
and to have that architectural aspect.
mm,
So we've got a piece of architecture in different cities like New York, Toronto, Tokyo, London, Paris, and so on. And they all have a subtle detail. And then, like you said, you can get it in brass, which is our entry level, um, silver, titanium, and different gold iterations as well.
mm. Wonderful. Yeah,
Yeah.
and you also have a blog, where you sort of talk about different people that are friends of Handsome, and you have like
hmm
interviews with different people, and I think that's a really cool aspect too, because that's kind of like
Yeah.
a living archive, or like a living library of like of all the people that have inspired or worked with Handsome, or are somehow connected.
For sure. For sure. We've had like we've been doing this for 10 plus years. So much of our personal circles have come through Handsome. We, like pre-COVID, we would be exhibiting 4 to 6 times a year
Mm,
in Paris and Florence and New York. And we got to meet a lot of super cool people. So we thought the journal would be a nice place for us to kind of share those conversations that we might have been having over dinners and at the shows and things like that, to sit down and just chat with people and get their insights on what they enjoy in different cities, advice for young creatives, different things like that.
yeah, no, that's wonderful. And I also
hmm
wanted to ask you about music, and it's important
Sure.
in your in your creative process. I remember that when you initially released um, I forget what collection it was, but I think it was a bunch of T-shirts. They came
hmm
with a mix track,
Yeah.
along with the purchase. Like you actually sent a physical, I think it was CD at the time that you sent to
Yeah.
people that bought the T-shirt, and also a handwritten note saying thank you for buying this. And I thought
hmm
that was incredible. Like what a way you know. To personalize and also to give them like a feeling of like this is a world, they're inhabiting a world now. It's like you've given them a space almost through the music.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I appreciate that. Yeah, so when we were doing the more like graphic based concept collections, we would really take a holistic approach, and we would usually get a different DJ to make a soundtrack to go with the concept,
Mm,
which, like you mentioned at the time, CDs were kind of the medium that people were consuming. So we'd include a CD with it,
yeah.
and it would correspond to the story, which would kind of dictate the graphics, and then the handwritten note was just like a way of saying thank you, because it's such a privilege to be able to do something you enjoy and to have people engage with it and participate. And back then we would have like all the inventory at our house, and like we'd be picking and packing and writing the notes and stuff like that, which was nice to kind of be hands-on with the purchases.
That's really cool. That's really cool.
Yeah.
Well, inspired by this idea of of making conceptual art or making conceptual fashion, um, do you have any references? Do you have any people that you look up to? And they can be either discrete or abstract influences. So like whether it's an architect or a musician or a composer or a chef, like who are the people that
Hmm.
inspire your process as a
Yeah, that's a really
conceptualist?
good question. Yeah, I think like since we started and since I was young, I've always been a really big like consumer of information. Like I always want to know what's happening in the fashion world right now, what's happening in music. Even now, I think music isn't as directly prominent in the brand, but it's still like not a day goes by where there isn't music playing in the office, and that's influencing our creativity, because it kind of sets the backdrop for that.
Yes.
um I think musically the journey has kind of shifted through the 10 years. Like in the early days when as Christian and I like designing in our dorm room, it was all like Blink 182 and like Taking Back Sunday and Alkaline Trio and all that like punk pop emo movement, um, which really kind of captured the energy that we were in. Like Christian and I really forged our friendship at those concerts. Like when we were in high school, we would just be those two friends that wanted to go to all those shows. And um, yeah, music definitely played a big role in that respect. I think like fashion wise, excuse me. Yeah, I've definitely been influenced in so many different ways. Like I think those early examples of like Clemonico and Guess as a kid,
Hmm.
and the impact that those have on you and your perception of the brands. I think like Nike has been a mainstay in my life in terms of like what that's meant to me, and it's pretty fascinating to see how they've like preserved their brand value with a brand that's so ubiquitous and widely available.
Hmm.
um, I think there's some brands that I really admire from a technical point of view, like they just execute products at the highest quality. Like Arc'teryx does amazing technical gear. I guess growing up in Canada, you really appreciate like outerwear and kind of analyzing things like that. I've always had a real fascination with that.
Hmm.
Um, and then in terms of like influences on our early days with like graphic collections, I would probably say like Supreme was really big for us.
Hmm.
Um,
I
and
remember
yeah,
I remember coming to New York, to
hmm,
visit you, and we actually went to a Supreme store,
yeah,
because my sister wanted to, I think, get some shoes, and I saw them and thought, okay, these are kind of cool. I got to get myself a pair too. And so
yeah,
that was kind of my first introduction to Supreme, because up until that point, like, I'd known about skater culture, but like the depth of my influence was just Vans. I knew about Vans, and that was it. I'd never heard of Supreme.
sure,
And like when I
yeah,
discovered Supreme, I was like, wow, this brand is deep. Like they've got some serious like ideas behind what they're doing. And I
yeah,
and I like their aesthetic. And it's kind of interesting, like the people in your life sort of clue you into the brands that are happening or that are interesting. And
yeah, yeah, for sure.
so it's like, when your sister got you those sweatshirts, it's like, she clued you into, okay, this is what's hip right now, and and
Definitely.
and it's so interesting how the people in our lives sort of show us, okay, this is what's hip right now, or this is what I like, and then our tastes are sort of the collective result of like all those influences.
For sure, for sure. And yeah, like it can be musically and art or architecture, like you had said. And sometimes someone will be like, check this out, this is important, or here's something interesting, and then it just kind of catches you and you go down a wormhole.
Yeah.
um, I think that's been like one of my favorite things about living in New York, is just like you're constantly exposed to new things, and it always feels like things that are emerging globally seem to go through these like unique cities like New York first.
Mm.
Um, so it's been a really cool way to kind of consume culture at different moments.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
And then there's also something that I consider really cool myself, which is
Hmm.
like when you have access to like all the experiments that sort of didn't exactly work out perfectly, like say a misprinted t-shirt. And
Hmm.
and like I love collecting them. I actually have a personal like weird obsession with misprinted t-shirts and like,
Okay.
and things that are like sort of, not perfect, like even dollar bills that have misprints and stuff like that, because I think that like these kinds of weird oddities and like mistakes actually end up
Mhm.
sometimes being cooler than the final product or like the finished version, because like
Yeah,
who
yeah.
else who else would have this, this weird, misprinted t-shirt, and get to wear it as like their own personal fashion statement.
Right, right. Yeah, for sure. I think there's really like something special, and you can see that human touch. Like sometimes the imperfections are what reveal that.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, I totally feel you on that. I think there's really like an appreciation for DIY right now. I feel like these things kind of go through cycles
Mm.
in fashion, where a few years ago it was all about like the biggest brands, and it was like a statement that you knew and you were kind of like buying into that cultural area. And now it's like a little more about self-expression, and like the t-shirt example you gave, like can you have something that's just different than everyone instead of just showing that you're the same as that tribe.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. It's interesting because anthropologically speaking, like human beings we're always having this weird, dance between fitting in and standing out, and it's like,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
it's like you know how do we at once belong and yet, retain who we are as individuals, whatever whatever that
Right, right.
whatever that means. And in fashion that line is particularly blurry, you know
Yeah, yeah, for sure, for
you know
sure. Yeah, I feel like you just got to do what excites you and what makes you feel good.
Yes.
And I think that's ultimately what is the most interesting.
Exactly. Yeah. No, I
Yeah.
agree. I agree with that 100%.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to ask you if you're influenced at all by haute couture, or like, or or some of the some of the stuff that's done like on the runway. The type of clothing that you know models will wear. For a particular dressmaker or a particular.
Sure,
Yeah,
sure.
are you interested in that kind of world of fashion as well, and do you draw from it?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think I'm, excuse me, I think I'm interested in it um, more like as a student. Like I
Mm.
will always look at the shows, and I'll always um, like check them out just to learn from them, and to see like where things are headed, or what a designer I like is excited by. I think when I was younger, I really used to think of fashion as a hierarchy, and it was kind of like the more luxury you went and the higher you climbed up that ladder, um, which uh, kind of went up, like you said, to like runway shows and couture and like those one-off pieces, the better it was. I think now when I really think about what excites me personally, it's not that. It's it just doesn't really resonate with me at this point. I love things that are well designed. I love things that you can wear every day,
Hmm.
that you can like beat up and not stress about. Like um I'm less into something that I can wear like once in a blue moon, or that's too precious, or
Mm.
that's going to affect how I like, behave, or where I sit, or if I want to like get on the ground with my kid or something like that. I don't want to be like sweating it.
Mm.
Um, and I think that definitely influences our design as a brand. Like I think in the jewelry, like titanium is our best selling metal, and I think part of that reason is because it's indestructible. It's like
Yes.
a piece of jewelry that you never have to think twice about, and if it bangs against something, you don't even have to really look down.
Yeah.
um, and I think similarly with apparel, like we just want to make well made things that you can actually enjoy every day, and um, yeah, that's not too fragile or precious.
That's amazing. Yeah, and
Yeah.
and to me that makes total sense, something that's utilitarian and at the same time
Mm-hmm.
beautiful, you know. Uh
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
that makes a lot of sense. Um you know, what is it then, like in terms of how you how you express like yourself, like on a formal occasion, like let's say, like you would wear a suit, but but one of those titanium cuffs would work just as well with a suit as with a t-shirt, you know.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Yeah, like I'll definitely dress
And
the part when it's appropriate. I have no
yeah,
like aversion to wearing a suit at a wedding or whatever the occasion might be.
yeah.
Um, I I agree. Like the jewelry is really versatile in that respect, where you can wear it in different contexts, and like a few of the stores that sell our jewelry are suiting stores,
Hmm.
and they've kind of put it through their own lens and their own assortment, and it makes sense, and it works for them too. Yeah.
Totally. Yeah.
Hmm.
And I mean, for example, the sweaters, your wool sweaters, they could be worn, under a jacket if you wanted,
Yeah,
right?
for sure, for sure. It's really like whatever you're feeling. I think the pieces are fairly classic and versatile. So like I'll wear one of our turtlenecks under a blazer. I'll wear the same turtleneck with jeans, and then the next day I'll wear it, running when it's -10 outside.
Yeah.
And it works like that because it's merino. And yeah, I like that. Yeah,
So and so for you, form and function are both equally important.
for sure. For sure. Yeah, I think they both have to coexist. Like I think if you lose the functionality, it's a bit of a compromised design, but you want something that can also look in place every day, and
Hmm.
and for whatever use different people might want out of it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I always loved Tokyo as well because they have an incredible music scene, of experimental music,
Hmm.
noise music, jazz music, um, you
Cool.
know, and it's actually really interesting for me because I find that the culture of the place, if it can be accurately captured in a piece or even represented in some way, like
Hmm.
with the fact that the Flatiron Building is in proportion with the I mean, that's incredible. So I'm just curious now, because now that you've mentioned the New York cuff, what's the design of the Tokyo, London, Paris? Like, what architectural elements inspired those?
Sure. So the Tokyo piece is based on the Rainbow Bridge.
Okay.
So we were looking at pictures of the bridge as well as the architectural drawings, and there's metal rivets that I'm actually wearing the Tokyo piece. I'm not sure if we can capture the detail on camera, but there's a sterling silver rivet
I
in
see that.
the
That's
at
really
one edge.
cool.
So that was based on the rivets that line the side of the Rainbow Bridge, and they're hammered in. And once they're hammered in, the way they react makes them irremovable. And it's such a small detail, but they're critical to the construction of the bridge.
Hmm.
So we wanted to kind of pay tribute to that really small detail. So we actually made these tiny sterling silver rivets and embed them into whether it's a titanium cuff or gold or brass or whatever it might be, which is it's one of my favorite ones. Like I've had this Tokyo bracelet since we made the original samples, and it's titanium. I wear it every day, and I quite enjoy it, and it reminds me of one of my favorite cities.
That's amazing. That's so cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
No, that's
Mm-hmm.
that's really amazing. And and it's interesting. It's interesting as well because these little details, they speak to the culture, the way that people think about things. Because if they were designing that same bridge somewhere else in the world, maybe they would have
Mm-hmm.
used something else to hold it,
Sure.
not rivets.
Yeah. Yeah.
So in some way, the fact that the architects, were designing this bridge in Japan and for, in that space, then
Mm-hmm.
somehow that made sense to them, and then it inspired
Right.
you.
Right.
So it's really interesting
Yeah.
how culture, has all these spin-offs. Like, who would think that, a rivet on a bracelet has anything to do with Japanese culture, and yet it totally makes sense. Like,
Yeah.
if you explained it to them, they'd be like, "Oh my god, that's incredible. That's totally a reflection of Japan." But it's very abstract at the same time. It's not something that immediately would make sense if they just saw it.
Yeah. Yeah. For sure. I think.
And
Well,
I like that a
I
lot.
really appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you. Um, yeah, I think with the rivet example and with all our pieces, we didn't want any of the details to be like the defining feature of the piece. Like we
Mm,
just wanted people to be able to wear something that's minimalist and understated. And then for those that want to go one layer deeper, they can, understand the physical reference. They can see the location coordinates lasered onto it. You can learn a little bit more about the architecture on our website. And then, if you feel inclined, you can dive deeper on your own.
yeah. No, it's great. It's great. Because
Hmm.
like when I'm composing music, I also think in terms of very abstract references, that
Yeah.
that are definitely very cultural and very specific, but at the same time that you wouldn't notice unless you really were paying attention and you were like, okay,
Right, right.
what is this about? And so
Hmm.
it allows you to dig really, like, to go down that rabbit hole. But if you just want to, if you just want to sort of go around or over the rabbit hole, then you're also allowed to do that too.
Yeah, yeah, for sure, for sure. And there's cool like stories behind a lot of the architecture, just in like a human sense, like you had touched on, like for example, the Paris design is based on the pyramid at the Louvre,
Mm,
and like it was created long after the museum, and when I.M. Pei made it, he was a Chinese American architect who was commissioned this job in France, and it was really in such stark contrast to the rest of the site. So it had mixed reviews, but you give it a little bit of time, and now it's such an iconic piece of architecture. Like you
yes.
go there during the day, and like everyone is grabbing a picture of it, and it's such a part of Paris. And then even people we've gotten to know who live in Paris, they also have an appreciation for it, and it's actually quite like a part of the city. Like one of our friends was saying that they have kind of a tradition when they have a late night that they end it at the pyramid, and it's just super quiet and empty, and it's just a chance for them to admire something beautiful.
Hmm.
And that same thing that's so embraced was once
Reviled.
yeah, yeah,
Well,
um,
it's like with Frank Gehry's architecture. A lot of critics will say, the building does not fit in this space. Like it makes no sense. Why would you,
mhm,
you know, um, and like for example, Walt Disney Concert Hall. You know,
mhm,
I mean, it's a spectacular building, and like everybody wants to take a photo with the facade. It's iconic. But
right,
when it was unveiled, people were like, this architecture doesn't fit with anything that's around it, and therefore, it's not very good.
right,
You have
right.
to respect your surroundings. Um, and I think IMP probably faced the exact same reaction.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I think like with so many things in life, you just got to give it time to really
Yes.
understand it. Um,
Yeah.
it's not about that immediate reaction.
Yeah. Yes,
Yeah,
things definitely take a different perspective through time.
yeah,
They either grow on you, or you hate them even more. It sort of depends.
right.
It
And
sort
I'm
of depends.
sure, yeah, for sure. And I'm sure you could really speak to this more, but if you think of music, whether it's, you know, 5 years old or 50 years old, it has a different meaning in terms of where it's sitting in history and
Yes.
how you get to enjoy it. Like, you know, for example, like the Beatles can't be the same thing to us as it was to people who are at the shows
Yeah.
experiencing that energy
Yeah.
and understood the cultural context that it was coming up in and so on, you know.
Yes.
Um yeah,
Yes, and things, I mean, that's really the true test of art and of, well, anything, is does it stand the test of time? Is it still relevant
right.
after, I don't know, 10 years, 5 years, 15 years, 100
Yeah,
years? Like,
yeah.
some things that have really like stood the test of time, like for example, Plato's writings, I mean,
Hmm.
people still read that, and
Yeah,
and
yeah.
somehow in some way it still makes some sort of sense, even though our culture is so very different than the culture back then, you know
Right, right.
so I guess the question is, then, is the art universal, and will it stand the test of time? And that kind of lets you know whether the art was any good to begin with, or
Right. Yeah,
whether it was just a flash in the pan, or whether it was just a, a moment in time, like like Gangnam Style, for example.
sure.
You know so
Yeah. And like something like that was obviously like a viral sensation, and then maybe it was cooler to dislike it. And now maybe if we fast forward another 50 years, we'll really understand the cultural context that it lived in and the influence that it had on things that came after.
yes,
Um, and like you said, some things are a flash in the pan, and I think some things are the inverse, where they're really underappreciated
yes.
until maybe it makes its way into academics
Mm.
or some other context where it gets kind of the credit that maybe it deserved.
Yeah, like Thelonious Monk, the jazz pianist.
Mhm.
He was not appreciated by most people. They thought his music was too harsh, too abrupt, too dissonant. It was only
Mhm.
the jazz cognoscenti who really knew who he was. But then, a few years later, he was profiled for Time magazine, and he appeared on the cover of Time magazine. And suddenly, everyone knew who he was, and everyone wanted to play with him, and everyone thought that he was hip. You know,
Right.
so it's interesting how like our cultural institutions sort of dictate, okay, is this relevant, and is this hip, or is this
Mhm.
not? Like
Mhm.
if you
Mhm.
suddenly get a profile in the New York Times, then everyone's going to be like, oh, this is really happening, this is so cool. And
Right.
and you're
Right.
like, but what about before that article happened? Was I not as cool?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like was I
For
not as
sure.
was I not as relevant, or were people just not hip to it? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely. Definitely. Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I think it's the case with art. I think it's the case with consumer goods. Like
Yeah.
the the relevance is often so much based on that cosign or just your ability to market and do PR for
Yes.
what you're creating.
Yes,
Yeah.
and then some people will say, "Oh, you should not market yourself, or you shouldn't, it's not good for you to self promote," you know,
Yeah.
um, and I think that's so ridiculous. I mean,
Yeah.
like the whole idea of the startup, the whole idea of like doing your own thing. Of course, you're gonna have to be your own cultural or brand ambassador. You're gonna have to,
Hmm.
you're gonna
Hmm.
have to, talk about it and make it a thing. Um, so
For
so
sure.
so yeah, building an identity and building value, I think, are so such interesting subjects.
Hmm. Hmm.
Did you ever do your doctorate, PhD, or not yet?
No, I haven't. I
Okay.
maybe at some point I'll go back to school.
Yeah.
But yeah, I did. Like my undergrad was completely unrelated. I did international development and psychology.
Nice.
Um,
But hey, why is it
both.
why, how is it not relevant? It's totally relevant. I mean, you studied psychology, so I mean that tells you, like, that allows you to study how people react to the stuff that you're making. So it's totally relevant.
Yeah, yeah, that's true. That's true. It always there's always some takeaway. I guess it's not directly relevant in a more. I love psychology. Like I did those courses purely because I international development as well. I was really drawn to it, and I had really cool work experiences in Afghanistan and Pakistan, and I think it actually has come back into the brand. Like we've really had more of a focus on giving back, and a lot of that has been in developing countries.
Hmm.
Um, that's been like really motivating and really like a reason to keep like growing the brand is just like what it enables us to do that's meaningful.
Yes.
Like last year we got to work with a nonprofit called Barakat Bundle, which provides like physical care bundles to new mothers and newborns in need in developing countries. Um, and yeah, it was really cool to get to do what we're doing anyways, which is, creating and distributing these pieces, but to have more of a meaningful impact with it.
That's
Yeah.
amazing. That's really beautiful.
Yeah.
That's
Hmm.
amazing. And the reason I asked you if you're thinking about a doctorate is because it would be really
Hmm.
interesting to see, like, what your thesis would be. Like, would it be directly connected with Handsome? Would it be more abstract? Like, would you do
Right,
research?
right.
Like, how would it work? Because, like, all these experiences, I know you're documenting them. I know you're doing this journal. It's really amazing. I'm just curious, like, how that would look in a paper, or like, or even in a film, like a film about Handsome. I think that would be really cool.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. I honestly hadn't thought about the academic route. I would, we'll see where the story goes, but I loved group. So if we had the privilege to be part of one, that would be amazing.
Very cool.
Mm.
Well, AJ, thank you so much
Yeah,
for this. It's been a pleasure talking with you and learning about what matters to you.
for sure.